Hi everybody, and welcome to Professor Dulles' office. I'm actually not a professor, I'm just playing one on YouTube for the sake of what we're talking about today, which is deconstructing C.S. Joseph's type grid. And by that I mean the type grid companion, which is the 48-page PDF about how to type yourself. Type grid companion is interesting in some respects, but it is not MBTI, and it's really not Jungian cognitive functions. And it's right up in the foreword that the goal of the type grid companion is to provide consistent, repeatable results. By doing that, the type grid companion largely abandons Jungian cognitive functions in favor of stuff that's more measurable and more consistently reproducible. So what am I talking about with this? Well, stay tuned and we will get into it in excruciating detail. So, part one. One of the odd things you'll find in the foreword of Type Grid Companion is that one of CSJ's mentors, Dr. Berens, there's the phrase in the acknowledgement of, while I recognize we've had conflict with our interpretations of the science, ... It's an odd phrase. Why would that be in there? Well, let's keep going. Dr. Linda Berens, of course, a long and storied academic, research in personality theory, including one of the kind of creators of the DISC system, has developed through her academic research the concept of interaction styles. So you've got directing, initiating, outcome, and wouldn't you know it, in the type grid, we see C.S. Joseph has brought in expression styles, directive, initiating, and outcome. Dr. Linda Berens came up with the idea of temperament dichotomies of abstract versus concrete, affiliative, structure. C.S. Joseph has worldviews in Type Grid Companion: abstract, affiliative, systematic. Dr. Berens is a peer of David Keirsey and mentions the Keirseyan temperaments of the artisan, the rational, the guardian, the idealist. C.S. Joseph has got dispositions: the artisan, intellectual, the guardian, and idealist. So you get the idea. There's a real kind of lift and shift of Dr. Berens' research, her academic work, which is a larger body of work, being greatly condensed into a couple of PDF sheets by C.S. Joseph using a lot of the same, or pretty much all the same terminology. And to take a step back, for those of you who might say, well, why would Dr. Berens allow this? I know this because I have published before. Copyright applies to only the entirety of a work. You cannot copyright a table, you cannot copyright specific words. Therefore, the CSJ organization can handily take this sort of terminology and use it as they please. You also can't copyright things like game rules or rules. So once again, this is a way that the C.S. Joseph organization can use a lot of Dr. Berens' research, repurpose it as they see fit, even if it's a lot of the same terminology. It's all permitted under fair use. So what does Dr. Berens have to say about her own research in interaction styles that's been lifted by the CSJ organization, dropped into Type Grid Companion, and used to determine your MBTI type? Well, Dr. Berens says interaction styles is a typology that's different from and does not stem from Jung's model. Basically, it can't be much clearer than that. This is not Jungian cognitive functions. To explain more, Dr. Berens says interaction styles is observable behavior patterns. It tells you the how. Jungian cognitive functions might tell you the what and the why. The Jungian functions tell you about the underlying perceiving and judging functions. That's not what interaction styles are about. Interaction styles are about how a person presents themselves through their behavior. It's going to look kind of more like Enneagram, but it's really an amalgamation. It's a cross-section that's not really MBTI, but has a couple of similarities to it, but it's not. So Dr. Berens, more of her observations, well, the link between her research and Jungian psychological type is a match of patterns. It just happens that, yes, there's some correlation here and there, but it is not, it's not MBTI. Again, I don't know how much clearer one can be that her interaction styles, which are the bulk of Type Grid Companion, she says, don't use this for MBTI because that's not what it's for. And you can get as specific as abstract concrete. Is that the same as intuitive and sensing? No, it is not. According to the creator of this academic research, she is saying, do not use it in this way. What does Type Grid Companion do? It looks at abstract and says, oh, that's intuitive. It looks at concrete and says, oh, that's sensing. Precisely what the creator of this research said, do not do. What you can do with interaction styles, and Dr. Berens, I think, is right on target here, is if you have MBTI types already in mind and you're trying to look, you're not sure which type of person is, and you're trying to look through a different lens, that's where interaction styles can help clarify. If you don't know if someone's an ISTJ or an ESTJ, you can use the way that their observable interaction style, their ways of expression, as a way to determine what are they probably more extroverted in the way that they go to, that the way that they present themselves, or more introverted. Anyway, the way to do it right under Dr. Berens is to use 5 different potential lenses to triangulate on personality type. So there's the holistic view of the person, then temperaments and the interaction styles, but you also need to look at the cognitive function dynamics and then account for or compensate for what's called systemic influences, meaning what's the context, what's the upbringing of the person, where are they coming from. So take into account how they are coming to the typing and have it done by a coach as part of a coaching session to really get to a type that works correctly with the person. So what Type Grid Companion does is it takes interaction styles, and it's the great majority of the document. Then it's got a smidgen of temperaments, and then a sprinkling of cognitive dynamics, and not really any sort of measure of whole type or systemic influences. So yeah, you've got the concept there of triangulating, but it's just there in concept. It's not holistically formed in a way to get everything to look through various lenses to get things right. So to close out on what else Type Grid Companion has got in it, yes, there's that little smattering of what CSJ calls armaments, your arsenal and your elemental affinities. That corresponds to neo-Jungian judging axes and perceiving axes. So that's kind of a little sprinkling hint, although the axes are not part of original Jungian psychological types. It's generally accepted in neo-Jungian concepts that this is the way that things line up. And then there's the quadras of socionics, yet another personality theory that is similar to MBTI, but not the same, that is incorporated into the type grid as the quadra 4 square. Now, the socionics folks are also vocal in saying that they are not MBTI. They're based on Jungian principles, but MBTI and socionics each goes in a different direction. So once again, we're getting to the point. Type Grid Companion is using tools in ways that the creator of those ways is saying, don't do that. And then it's incorporating other tools that are from other personality systems where those people are saying, we're not compatible with this other stuff. And yet it's all stitched together and presented as a cohesive whole, as if it's one singular way to determine your type. That's not the way it was intended to be done. It is basically, it's a Frankenstein combination that's got all of the details stripped out of it. It is what I would say is not a tool that's appropriate for determining your type, because the majority of it is interaction styles, which is not a good map to your Jungian cognitive functions. Okay, on to part 2, where we're going to get into statistical analysis. Don't worry, I'm not an SPSS guy. I'm not going to do anything like deep and detailed, but I'll show you through a light overview where stuff is broken with Type Grid Companion. And let's start with some of the individual dichotomies that are in the companion, one of them being the interaction style of initiating versus responding. And again, this Dr. Berens, I believe, would agree with the sorts of stuff that I'm throwing out here. This interaction style does not map to Jungian introversion and extroversion, because that intro and extroversion under Jung is about engagement with the subject first or with the object first, with looking internally versus externally. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone will initiate or respond, which are more specific to social contexts. So you can get someone who is an FE Dom who might actually sit and listen and wait and respond to people. One thing that initiating may mean is that they may be someone who is more SE forward, but even that is, it's an indirect correlate at best. It's not something that you're going to be able to say, as Type Grid Companion did, that if you initiate, you must be an extrovert. In Jung, if you respond, you must be an introvert in Jung. Next, abstract versus concrete. I was already getting into that. Dr. Berens says, don't do it. Don't say that concrete is sensing and abstract is intuitive. And in fact, what I've seen based on interviews done using Dr. Berens' concepts is that you ask an abstract question, you get an abstract answer. You ask a concrete question, you get a concrete answer. So this doesn't really hold up in any sense. And in fact, if I type myself in the Type Grid Companion system, even though here I'm talking about a whole lot of abstract stuff, I believe that I'm mostly a concrete person. I focus on stuff that's real, as opposed to being, I'm not deeply philosophical. I'm talking about practical stuff here, about practical application of concepts that have been misapplied. So then you get the other dichotomies of affiliative and pragmatic, direct and informative, progression and outcome, and it's kind of all over the map in terms of, well, affiliative is all the feelers but the STJs. Pragmatic is all the thinkers, but it's also the SFPs. There's certain types, certain combinations that are direct versus informative, and it's, these checkerboards and those columns, and it all looks kind of very neat that it's always 8 of these and 8 of those. And if you're direct, you're one of these 8. If you're informative, you're one of those 8, and so on and so forth. Real life does not work that way. But if we look at direct dichotomies, if we start with, say, your regular MBTI test, your ordinary MBTI test is trying to do something between 2 poles directly related to the MBTI types. So it's trying to figure out, when it asks a question of, are you going to be more intuitive on this scale, or are you going to be more sensory on this scale? Are you going to be more a cognitive extrovert on this scale, or more of a cognitive introvert? What we've got here is something where the center lines are not going to exist the way that they do in those direct MBTI correlates. What you'll have instead is that maybe most people lean toward abstract and a few people lean toward concrete. So maybe there's 10 types that tend toward abstraction and 6 types that tend toward concrete. And then in pragmatic versus affiliative, maybe you'll see that 12 types are more affiliative and only 4 types tend to be more pragmatic. It's generally, when you look at real life statistics, very, very rarely are you going to get those real easy correlated dichotomies mapped out when you're using factor X to see if it matches with factor Y. So if you're doing systematic versus interest, which is not directly mapped to a cognitive function dichotomy or MBTI dichotomy, you're probably going to find that there's not just that there's an imbalance, not an 8 to 8, but also that maybe one or two types tend to be very strongly systematic. And then maybe a couple types are kind of weakly systematic, and then a couple types are going to fall somewhere in the middle. And then one or two are going to be more interest, and then you'll get like a couple more that are very strongly interest. That's the way that statistics usually work, that you end up with these, if you take a large enough sample, you end up with these bell curves of behaviors, and those bell curves are not going to center where you expect them to center because you're not correlated directly to MBTI types. You'll have them be kind of off kilter this way and that. So here's an example of what it would actually look like, that if you have this, if you're measuring, say, pragmatic versus, informative, or direct versus informative, you might find that the informative types start with the most extreme being NTPs, and then maybe there's some NFJ and NFPs, and you sort of work your way through and eventually start getting to the sensor types. But in the middle, you're going to have this big bowl, this big belly of types that don't firmly fall into being direct versus informative. They're just kind of someplace in between. And then here's kind of in a scatter chart what you're going to see if you look at it in correlated dimensions to say, if I've got, pragmatic versus outcome or what have you, that there's going to be the scatter plot of, some do fit, some don't fit, some kind of break the mold. But eventually, if you have enough samples in there, you're going to get kind of a line where you see sort of a correlate between the two different ones. And if you abstract a particular type from that, if you're lucky, then you get this kind of best case of like, look, gee, that's a nice shotgun pattern of the people who are one particular function from interaction style that match a particular MBTI type. When you see this, that's really good, because then you can kind of say, all right, if I use this pragmatic versus informative, and people are really pragmatic, and the STPs both tend to be really pragmatic, then if I get this, I've got a hint that they're more likely to be an STP. But more likely, you're going to get this kind of stuff, where it's like, all right, some answers were pragmatic, some answers were informative, some were direct, some were, I don't know. It's basically the interaction styles are not going to map directly to MBTI type. You might have a weak correlation. It's kind of, sort of, maybe this way, maybe that way. So when somebody ends up saying, well, you're all outcome focused and you're all pragmatic, well, that's nice, but it doesn't map to MBTI type necessarily. It means that you could be one of various types. As Dr. Berens said, you can sort it out to, if you've got two types that you're trying to determine between, that lens might help you determine if you're on track or not, or which one of those two you should lean toward and explore further. So once again, in another dimension, say you get your strong correlates, your weak correlates, some that might not have any clear indication. And this is what happens when you try to take one set of data, like interaction styles and expression styles, and then try to map that into a different set like MBTI. So now on to the conclusion. And what I do want to make sure of is to say, I'm not out to trash TypeGrid outright. The TypeGrid companion does do something really well. It delivers your interaction style, and that's a more repeatable result than trying to sort out your Jungian cognitive functions. What it gets wrong is it's not telling you your MBTI type necessarily. It's telling you something that's close to your DISC personality theory type. That is, instead of that you're an INFP or an INTJ or an ISFP, you're a chart the course type, or a behind the scenes type, an in charge type, or a get things going type, or that you're more dominant, more influential, more steadiness, or more conscientiousness focused. Therefore, the TypeGrid companion really gets it wrong by using the MBTI dichotomies. What it also does that's really cool is that it's got three different personality theory kind of widgety things that it presents to you. It presents it all as being one cohesive thing, which it's not, but it is kind of nifty that it's like, hey, check this out. Here's temperaments. Here are interaction styles and expression styles. And then here's a smattering of socionics theory. They don't fit together, but you can use each one of these as a tool to see where you are placed in that tool, and then maybe that helps you draw some conclusions about type. But presented as one tool, that shouldn't have been done. It should have gone back to say, this is a socionics bit, this is a Keirseyan or Berens temperament bit, and here's something on interaction styles, to understand where the seams are, because it is a Frankenstein together set of personality theories. So what they didn't get right, well, they did try to get a triangulation through three different personality theories. Problem being, they went real heavy on interaction styles, and then everything else is kind of an afterthought. And it doesn't note that the lenses each are different tools that measure different things, as opposed to saying the way that Type Grid Companion presents itself, that it's all one kind of cohesive personality theory, which it is not. What else they tried to do? Well, they aimed for consistency in results, and that's also a really cool thing to do, which they did through interaction styles, which is not MBTI. That's a really nice way of people to determine their type through interaction style, but it's not the MBTI type, and it's not Jungian cognitive functions. And then what else? They tried to compress everything down to a point of just being 48 pages, most of it graphical and most of it filled with keywords, so it's easily digestible. It's kind of the fast food version of a bunch of different personality theories where you don't need to read 3 or 5 or 8 or 10 books to understand all of the individual theories. Ain't no one got time for that. So what you can do instead is pick up this guide and understand a number of personality theories and kind of work your way through it. But it is a fast food approach. You're not going to get a good rounded out understanding of where is this stuff coming from, what does it mean, what are the nuances. And yeah, that's the bit at best. And in particular, what you're not getting is Jungian cognitive function theory. That's in which you go deep, and that's the foundation of MBTI. It's the foundation of socionics. It is so important in the underlying theory that, well, skipping it kind of makes the whole Type Grid Companion not really correct in a Jungian cognitive function foundation that's needed for MBTI. So the final word on all of this. One of the things that's nice is that CSJ mentions mentors and has like a whole nice list of a who's who of major neo-Jungian figures, and Jung himself, of course. But what's not done is to go back and accredit the individual pieces back to their source for people to understand for further reading where the stuff is coming from. There's also what I describe as hidden stitching, where the way that everything's put together, it's hard for me to tell because I'm not sure if some of this stuff is sprung out of CSJ's own mind, or if it's from researchers from Acknowledgements or neo-Jungians that I haven't read. But it's really tough to tell, to say where, like, is it CSJ language? Is this now his stuff? Or is it something that is from one of the Jungians or neo-Jungians? Is it real academic research by them? Is it stuff that's been backed by academics, or is it just more of theory that's presented as fact? What really should be done here is to go back and give credit to what came from where. to go to the interaction styles and say, this is Dr. Linda Berens, specifically call out, here's the stuff that's hers, and then bring in the CSJ content and say, okay, these are my keywords and my thinking, or this is something that came from another third party, and if so, whom? And then that way you could tell what's what came from whom, and allow people to see for themselves what's backed as, what's backed by academic research and field research, what's just academic theory, what's sprung from the mind of C.S. Joseph himself. And then that way people could make their own decisions of which parts of the type grid companion they can see as valid and which maybe are on more shaky ground. That's all I've got. I do think Type Grid Companion is a good tool for measuring certain things. It's just that if you use it to unequivocally tell your MBTI type, if you use Dr. Berens' interaction styles to tell MBTI type, well, there are correlates, but there's probably a good chance that stuff could be wrong because it fails to take into account the holistic being of the person and the systemic influences that they've got in addition to their temperament and their overall other factors in addition to interaction styles. That's it from me. If you're still here, thank you so much for your time and attention, and I hope that this gives some idea of where stuff came from and what may or may not be valid and how it is or is not valid in the Type Grid Companion. Bye for now.